Three of the world's most powerful economies sit right next to each other, sharing thousands of years of history, culture, and even writing systems. They should be best friends, right? Wrong. Welcome to East Asia's most toxic relationship, a three-way grudge match between Japan, China, and South Korea that makes your worst family drama look like a tea party. In 2019, South Korea smashed their Japanese cars and burned Japanese flags in the streets. Chinese protesters have attacked Japanese businesses, destroying anything from ramen shops to car dealerships. Meanwhile, Japanese bookstores dedicate entire sections to books about why their neighbors can't be trusted. This isn't ancient history. This is happening right now in the 21st century between nations that desperately need each other to survive. To understand why these three nations can barely stand to be in the same room together, we need to travel back in time. But here's the thing. They can't even agree on when the problem started. For China and Korea, the story begins in the late 19th century and early 20th century, when Japan transformed from an isolated island nation to an imperial powerhouse. Between 1910 and 1945, Japan colonized Korea entirely, attempting to erase Korean culture, forcing Koreans to adopt Japanese names and banning the Korean language in schools. Imagine being forced to forget your own name, your language, your identity. That's what millions of Koreans lived through. Meanwhile, Japan's invasion of China in the 1930s escalated into full-scale war. The 1937 Nanjing massacre saw Japanese troops slaughter an estimated 200,000 to 300,000 Chinese civilians and soldiers in just 6 weeks. South Korea, liberated in 1945 after Japan's surrender, split into North and South, but the hatred lingered. China, emerging from civil war as the People's Republic in 1949, viewed Japan as an eternal aggressor. Even though diplomatic relations were normalized between Japan and South Korea in 1965 and between China and Japan in 1972, these were fragile band-aids over festering wounds. Textbooks in each country tell skewed versions. Japanese ones often downplay wartime crimes, sparking outrage in Seoul and Beijing. A 2015 survey by the Pew Research Center found that 78% of South Koreans and 81% of Chinese held unfavorable views of Japan, rooted in this history. Fast forward to 2025, and you might think all these three economic powerhouses would have figured out how to get along. After all, China is Japan's largest trading partner. Japan-China trade hit $293 billion last year, and South Korea's exports to China grew by 6.6%. They're so economically intertwined that you can't make a Samsung phone, a Sony PlayStation, or a Chinese smartphone without components from all three countries. But economic interdependence hasn't killed the hatred. It's just given it new weapons. Take the Senkaku Islands dispute, where Japan and China are playing a deadly game of maritime chicken over a rock so small they couldn't fit a decent shopping mall. These uninhabited islands in the East China Sea have become the flashpoint where Asia's two largest economies could stumble into actual warfare. Chinese Coast Guard vessels now make ceremonial incursions into Japanese territorial waters once every month like clockwork, while Japanese defense forces scramble fighter jets in response. Meanwhile, the Korea-Japan relationship remains poisoned by unresolved historical issues. Despite the South Korean president's historic decision in 2025 to visit Japan first on his inaugural diplomatic tour, breaking 60 years of tradition, the fundamental wounds remain unhealed. South Korean courts are still ordering Japan to pay compensation to comfort women survivors, while Japan insists these issues were finally and irreversibly resolved in previous agreements. Here is where the Asia-hate triangle gets really insidious. These countries have weaponized their economic relationships. When South Korea agreed to deploy the American THAAD missile defense system in 2016 to protect against North Korean threats, China didn't just protest diplomatically. It launched an economic war. Chinese tourists, who made up the vast majority of visitors to South Korea, simply vanished overnight. Chinese consumers boycotted Korean products. The Korean supermarket giant Lot, which provided land for the THAAD deployment, saw its entire Chinese business obliterated. South Korea lost billions in tourism and trade revenue, proving that in the Asia-hate triangle, economic interdependence isn't a peace dividend, it's a vulnerability to be exploited. China has perfected this playbook. When Japan nationalized 3 of the Senkaku Islands in 2012, China organized anti-Japanese riots that destroyed Japanese businesses and cars across Chinese cities. Japanese companies saw their factories vandalized, their employees threatened, and their market share evaporate as Chinese consumers turned nationalism into economic warfare. Just when you think the Asia-hate triangle couldn't get more complicated, enter North Korea, the wild card that simultaneously unites and divides the 3 powers. On paper, the North Korean threat should bring Japan, South Korea, and China together. After all, nobody wants a nuclear war on their doorstep. But the reality is messier. China props up North Korea as a strategic buffer against American influence, while simultaneously getting frustrated with Pyongyang's nuclear provocations that bring more US military hardware into the region. China is North Korea's lifeline, providing 90% of its trade. Yet Beijing can't control Kim Jong-un's nuclear ambitions or his growing romance with Vladimir Putin. Perhaps nowhere is the schizophrenia of the Asia-hate triangle more apparent than in the realm of culture. Japanese anime and manga dominate global entertainment, generating approximately $50 billion in cultural exports. Korean K-pop and K-dramas have created a global cultural phenomenon worth billions, with Korean culture exports growing exponentially year over year. But here's the twist. The same Japanese youth who might protest their government's visits to Yasukuni Shrine are binge-watching Korean dramas, while Korean fans of Japanese anime simultaneously participate in anti-Japanese demonstrations. Chinese consumers boycott Japanese products during political crises, then queue up for the latest Nintendo games when tensions cool down. The US sits at the center of this triangular mess like a ringmaster trying to manage these 3 tigers who hate each other more than they fear the ringmaster. America maintains defense treaties with both Japan and South Korea, has a complex economic relationship with China, and needs all 3 countries to contain North Korea and maintain Pacific stability. But America's strategy of building a united front against China runs headlong into the reality that its 2 key allies can barely stand each other. When the US pushes for trilateral military cooperation between America, Japan, and South Korea, historical grievances immediately surface. South Korean progressives see closer military ties with Japan as a betrayal of historical justice, while Japanese conservatives bristle at being lectured about history by countries they once dominated. The Asia-hate triangle represents one of the most dangerous paradoxes in international relations. 3 countries that need each other to prosper, but seem incapable of trusting each other to survive. Their conflicts aren't just regional squabbles. They're global threats that could trigger trade wars, military conflicts, and economic crashes that would dwarf previous crises. The stakes couldn't be higher. In an era where artificial intelligence, climate change, and nuclear weapons require unprecedented international cooperation, the inability of Asia's 3 great powers to overcome their historical grievances could doom not just the region, but the world. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe.